Hi. Okay. So, all of you that are sick, I hope you guys get better. Where were we last time? I think we were at Miriam. So we're actually at the last part of this place. Okay. So yeah, Miriam. Okay. So Numbers chapter 12. So I think yeah, after this, it's Balaam, and then there needs to be a new section. Okay. So Miriam was Moses' older sister who had protected him in Egypt when he was a baby. While the Israelites were traveling in the wilderness, Miriam grew jealous of Moses with her brother Aaron. And I want to reiterate here: it's not jealousy if it belongs. I mean, it's jealousy if it belongs to you, but if it doesn't belong to you, it's envy. And that's a distinction we have to make as Christians because a lot of times we confuse jealousy and envy. Like we confuse it, and that's not good because it means we don't fundamentally understand who belongs or what belongs to who. So Miriam grew jealous of Moses with her brother Aaron. Now she questioned Moses' right to lead the Israelites, saying that they were prophets too, for God also spoke to them. And this is also part of what Paul is later going to reference for the order of um, who's allowed to not who, who's allowed to teach and preach in a official church setting. But yeah, it's true that God did talk to Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, but not in the same way that God talked to Moses, which is face to face. Although, so it's like face to face, but by God covering Moses with His grace so that he doesn't die in His presence. So God was angered at their words, and He appeared to them as a pillar of cloud. He said that He only spoke directly to Moses. He means face to face, and that they were wrong to challenge their brother. This is from chapter 12. This is a Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else. So some people say Moses inserted this at the end, before he died. Maybe. Some people say other people, like future prophets that later were editing, added that in there. It doesn't matter who edited it in there. The point is, God wanted it in there, so He used His agents, either the priest or the prophets or Moses himself, to put that in there to teach us something about what it means to be meek, actually. Moses' humbleness contrasts with Miriam and Aaron. Unlike Moses, they care more about their own importance than obeying God's will. And that has something that's like it has partially to do with that. And chapter 12, verse 6, when there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, speak to them in dreams. God says that the usual way He speaks to prophets is by sending them dreams or ecstatic visions. Uh, we'll get to that part a little bit later. He speaks openly and directly only to Moses, and we don't want to. So we want to make sure we understand here, like it's God is not directly speaking to Moses as if in the same way that God spoke directly to Adam before Adam sinned. So there was a presence of God's grace that precedes God's holy, you could say like temple presence in talking to Moses, and this is necessary because otherwise Moses would die in the presence of God. So there has to be some sort of a, and that was the point of the clouds is when God lands on Mount, not when the temple presence of God lands on Mount Sinai, the smoke, the mountain starts to burn and it starts to smoke actually, and that smoke is purposely there to cover the presence of God. And this is this gets into that one CCM song that says darkness tries to hide. I forgot what the song is. I forgot what the rest of the lyrics is, but there's a song that says like you know. Something. I don't know what the rest of the lyrics is, but there's a verse that says like darkness tries to hide, and like they're trying to make it sound modern poetic, but it doesn't really capture what's actually going on. In fact, it almost goes directly opposite of what's going on because it's not that darkness is trying to hide, uh, or darkness isn't trying to hide away from God. God He envelops Himself in these dark clouds. The darkness is used to cover the glory of God, the temple presence glory of God, in order that his people don't die when God dwells among. So you have the holiest of holies, and then in there you're always supposed to be burning incense in there, and that incense is supposed to fill the area with like a fog, some sort of like a smoky cloud. And that's to prevent the people. So the idea of that is you have you have what's like representation of like the heaven, and God is like the God of heavens. The heaven of heavens is where God resides, and it's like that smoky, cloudy fog is what prevents you from dying, because God. I mean, so that's the. We'll get to this way later when we talk about the Leviticus stuff after we finish the people stuff, but that, yeah, so that's the point of that is that smoky, cloudy thing is supposed to cover the wrath of God in order that the people don't die from God's presence. So there always have when sinners are when sinners are in God's presence, there has to be a special presence of God's grace that precedes, so that we don't die from it. So, for instance, when we worship God in the sanctuary of the church, we can't see God, and we can't feel God in the literal sense of the word, where like our skin can literally make tactile contact with God. But that doesn't mean the presence of the Holy Spirit is not there. The temple presence of God is there, but it's there by grace, a special kind of grace. Because if it wasn't, and God's truly revealed presence actually landed, we would like all die, because no sinner can withstand the holy wrath of God. No sinner can withstand the holy presence of God, the holy presence of God. It's just not possible. Like the holy presence of God is God Himself. His presence is a consuming fire. God Himself, because God Himself is a consuming fire, is what Deuteronomy tells us. And because like I keep ending up rambling when I'm trying to explain like the small details. If you guys seen a Normal Finkelstein or those like guys who are trying to be as accurate as possible with what they're trying to describe, like that's what I keep on ending. So I apologize if this keeps I keep adding things to make it longer than it's supposed to be. The answer, I mean, I'm not trying to, but it's like trying to get the exact details right is like what's kind of what do you call it? It's propelling me. It's compelling me. And you'll know what I mean if you listen to somebody like Normal Finkelstein or E. Michael Jones, these guys that's just like have these encyclopedic knowledge of like details of like what they're talking about, because they're trying to make sure they get it right when they're communicating what they're communicating. But anyway, all this to say, so God's communication with Moses was not the same as God's communication with Miriam and Aaron, and they should have recognized that. They should have recognized that. But you could say maybe because of their desire for vainglory or self-glory, or desire to be recognized as a leader of one of the leaders of Israel. I mean, and the extreme version of it is not necessarily Aaron, but I mean, so Aaron too, but Miriam to a certain degree. You could say this is. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm saying there are views that says this is like the beginning. This is one of the spirit of feminism is Miriam. When they're trying, in other words, they're trying to overthrow the order of God, which He set through Moses. But in any case, so what was Miriam's punishment? She was plagued with a leprosy, a skin disease. And then, Moses intercedes for her, and then God's specific words or something like, it's as if a father had spit on her daughter. Like that's what the plague of leprosy is. So she has to be moved outside of the camp for several days for the cleansing process, because she was infected with the leprosy, skin disease. So there's actually a lot of we haven't done it in 2 weeks. And I remember we were supposed to talk about something else, but I forget. And a lot of the other guys, you guys are all the guys that are normally here, they're sick, or because it's like this beginning of the new year, they're unable to come because they have to get things ordered before, like get their house in order, which is fine. But I forgot what we were talking about 2 weeks ago because we're just going by this, and then oftentimes when we have people, we have these like rabbit trails. Anyway, so yeah, I forgot what we were supposed to talk about from last week, but yeah. Oh yeah. So jealousy and envy. Envy is when you desire something that's not yours. Jealousy is when you desire something that rightfully belongs to you. So when God is a jealous God for his people, he has the full authority to do that because he has the full right to do that because we actually belong to God. In fact, all things belong to God. But we want to say here, especially uh, because the people of God are actually paid for. So there is a debt called sin uh, toward God because we fall short of the glory of God, which He created for us, or He created us to be, and we fall short. We come short of that because we come short of God's glory. There's a kind of a negative value there. There's a we negative value like debt. There's negative value there, and it's deserving of God's punishment, but God poured out His wrath on His Son Jesus Christ, which is the reason why His church is bought and paid for. Which is why then we belong to God. So we belong to God in like more than just one regular created. Like we were created by God's sense. There's actually a greater. Not only are we made in, not are we only God. Not only are we God's creation, but we're also God's image bearers, and then we're restored God's image bearers. So there's like this manifold reason why we belong to God. So that's why God is able to have that. So that's the reason why God is able to have a jealous desire for us. Because we belong to God, and God desires that what belongs to Him stays with Him, and not go, whoremongering after like idols and stuff like that. That's jealousy. Envy is when they don't belong to you, or when the thing you desire doesn't belong to you. So, we're now coming into the territory of like coveting things, wanting other people's wives, wanting other people's husbands, wanting other people's houses, wanting other people's servants, or like their, livestock, or whatever the 10th commandment lays out, generally speaking. So yeah, as Christians, we have to make sure we don't, because in our modern day, we keep thinking things like, oh, your wife doesn't belong to you, so actually she does. Or, oh, you're such a jealous person, it's not good to be us. Actually, you're supposed to be jealous. Like that's the whole progression, is you're supposed to hold the other person, your spouse, accountable for their actions. And what's going on with like the American culture is we tend to focus on our individual liberties more than what's right and good in God's sight. And this priority flip, or this turning upside down of the priority, is what's basically not basically, but it's what's unraveling. It's what's tearing the seams of like this fabric of a family. Is this something greater than the order that God set by His word? And then whenever those order is flipped, whenever the priority is flipped, tears begin to form in the fabric of society, or whatever thing that the overturned order is attacking or undoing. So yeah, I apologize because I keep feeling like I'm rambling, but it's like all these things kind of like have to be said. Anyway, okay, so finally Balaam. So this is the last page of the packet that we have, and so next we're going to get a new packet. Balaam, King Balak of Moab was, and if you remember, Moab was the first of the Moab came from Lot and his incestual intercourse with one of his daughters. The other was Ammonites. So Moab was the other one. So King Balak of Moab was terrified when he saw the Israelites approach his kingdom. He sent for Balaam, a seer, which is a type of prophet, and asked him to curse the Israelites. When Balaam set off on a donkey to do this, the angel appeared and blocked his path. The donkey saw the angel and turned off the path. But when Balaam beat it for doing this, God gave the donkey speech, and it asked Balaam why it deserved the beating. God then opened Balaam's eyes to see the angel, who told him to do only what he instructed. God then made Balaam bless the Israelites instead of cursing them, making King Balak furious. And the pictures here is just Balak is unable to see the angel, so Balaam is unable to see the angel, so he beats his donkey. And the seer, Balaam was a seer who was famous for his ability to curse and to bless. Though he was not an Israelite, he feared God and could not resist his commands. The angel stands with sword drawn, blocking Balaam's way. Chapter 22, verse 35 says, Go with the men, but speak only what I tell you. The angel allows Balaam to continue his journey to Moab, but tells him to say only what God puts in his mouth. Fearful of punishment, Balaam obeys. Chapter 24, verse 17, a scepter will rise out of Israel. A scepter is a decorated staff held by a king as a sign of office. Balaam prophesies that the Israelites will one day have a great king and reference the future king David. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on here. So, especially in the Old Testament. Okay, so first we have to talk about blessings because we talked about this in the Sunday sermons. Right, so a blessing. So we have to make the difference here between a pagan way of sort of thinking about these things, and then like you could say the right way or the proper way, the biblical way of thinking about these words, because we don't want to be throwing words around. And I think this is one of the biggest plagues. This is one of the biggest plagues that plague Christianity, which is speaking Christianese and then using words without using words because it sounds Christian rather than using words because it means a particular thing in Christianity. Now, a word can mean many things, and many things can be represented by the word. But in the context of what you're talking about, you have to make sure you're talking about, like, you're consistent talking about it in that way. So, for instance, when we talk about God's grace, there's not only one of God's grace. There's like a technical aspect when you're talking about God's irresistible grace of His calling. But then there's just God's general grace. And then there's a technical form of grace or technical word that we use called grace, which refers to the holding back of God's wrath. So there's all these things that the word means, and we can't just use it and then we can't use it with an excuse saying, well, later we're just going to expect that people to know what we're talking about, or just so we don't get caught without defining it at that moment, because later then we'd have what's that called? The clause. Plausible deniability, I didn't mean it that way. So a lot of Christians are sort of afraid of this kind of stuff. And in that case, you got to do more studying. You have to do more. If you make a mistake, because if you make a mistake, you should be able to say, you know what, I made a mistake here. Or if it wasn't a mistake, if your views have developed, right, and now you're no longer thinking in the way that you used to. You can say, well, my thinking developed. I no longer think this way. I think this. So we have to be honest here. So let's go back to blessing. Blessing doesn't mean so the normal meaning of blessing that everybody seems to sort of blanketly use is when people say God bless you, a lot of people mean it to mean let good things happen to you. And then some people try to amend that and say, we pray that God will let good things happen to you. It's not too far from what it actually means, but in the biblical sense, a blessing from God is an increase in the order, God's holiness order. And what that means is when you bless somebody or when God blesses somebody, what you're desiring is that God add order and therefore add God's righteousness in and through the person. Prime example, Abraham, when God says, I will bless you and make you a blessing to all nations. God's primary intention is not to say, Abraham, I'm going to make good things happen to you. That's not his primary intention. What God's intention is for in and through Abraham, not only Abraham, but his family or his tribe, and then the nations around him, put away their idols. And instead of relying on created things, learn to rely on the Creator God through the Messiah that God's going to send. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about an increase in righteousness, increase in the order of God. And all created things have an order because they're spoken words of God. And the spoken words of God tell us something about God's character. And God's character is in God, these things are not distinct, but we have to make these distinctions. But God's character is an expression of God's whole, not an expression. By the things God created, God expresses his holiness. And that's why there's order there, because order is based in God's holiness. How do we know? God is triune, Father, Son, and Spirit. It doesn't mean there's a sub-order there. It means there's an order there. The Father is not the Son is not the Spirit is not the Father, the Son is not the Father. Like there's an order there. And yet they all have one essence that's the same one essence within the Godhead. So there's an order, but not a suborder in their ontology. And this is where, because when God speaks all things into creation, things reveal that order of God. That's why all things have an order. Or another term might be all things have a pattern, because it's supposed to make sense for us image bearers of God. So when you're talking about blessing, you're not talking about you can say like the pagan way of thinking about it is their primary concern is like the end result, where if there's righteous works, the wages of those righteous works is like good things to happen, or quote unquote good luck things to happen. In the same way that the wages of sin is death, and therefore anything that relates to death or points to death is what's supposed to happen if somebody sins. So, and what we're saying is the Christian definition of blessing and the way the Bible looks at it is not primarily through the good things that happen, but the righteousness that increases. Because the righteousness is the expression of God's order according to his special revelation, primarily. So, for instance, God says, it's not good to eat that tree from the knowledge of good and evil. So God's righteousness then is established when Adam does not eat from that fruit, because that's the order according to God's special revelation. Right. So this is the kind of things we're talking about here. We need to make sure we're defining things, carefully here, especially when we come to like passages like this, where like, what does Balaam have? What does it matter whether or not Balaam curses? In fact, you have to understand. So these things must be understood by the Christian, because otherwise, how do I even explain? Okay, so one step at a time. You can't give what you have. So when you're blessing somebody, you can't give a blessing that you are unable to receive. That's not possible. You can only bless other people if you have the capability of receiving that blessing, or if you have the capacity to have that blessing. So when, for instance, Jacob meets Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh doesn't bless Jacob, but Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Why is that? Because Jacob has a God who's the creator. Jacob's God is the creator of all the universe. And therefore, all things belong to God. So if anybody's giving anything here, Jacob is able to give Pharaoh, because Pharaoh's idols are not real. They're not real gods. They're demon, they're things that are created that have demons behind them. So when Jacob blesses Pharaoh, it's not about good things happening to Pharaoh. That's a secondary issue. Once the righteousness of God and the order of God increases in and through Pharaoh, among his family, within himself, among his family or tribe, and then among the nations around. So that's what we're talking about here. So when we're talking about blessing, we're talking about the increase of God's righteousness. So if bad things happen, and yet, so second part of the question is, well, why do bad things happen why is righteousness punished? Or another way would be, why are evil people rewarded with good? This is the effect of sin. It's not supposed to be this way, but because sin entered into the world, now it works this way. Not all the time, but it can. Not all the time, but it can work that way. That's the point. And because this is the influence of sin, and this is the thing that God is going to write at the end of the age, at the end of the time, at the end of history, the redemptive history. So we don't want to use the result and say this is why this person is not blessed, because that result not coming out is the effect of sin. Sin causes disorder because it goes against God's right. The definition of sin is unrighteousness. It's the work that goes against God's righteousness. In other words, if we're using the language of an order here, it's purposely going against things that go against the order of God. So you have sin, which is works that go against the order of God, and then you have the wages or the result of that. So you have this disorder coming out of disorderly works, and that disorder is the reason why And you can even say the manifestation of all. So you can say like the culmination of all this disorder culminated, right? So the most, if anybody should have been blessed with all the righteous, all the good things that come out of the wages of righteousness, it should have been Jesus Christ. But because of the effect of sin, the culmination of all that, right? All the disorder, the culmination of that, the culmination of all the disorder uh, culminated to the death of the most righteous Jesus Christ. And that's how we see. And but it didn't stay there. God reversed that order, and this is where redemption begins in the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, it begins in the death of Jesus Christ, but it's fulfilled or it's perfected in His resurrection. So this is why it's sort of like important to understand. Like we don't want to think of blessing in terms of like good things happening, bad things happening, because then we lose the point about blessing is actually meant to be an increase in God's righteousness. And in this world, God's righteousness might increase. So, for instance, through Abraham, God's order increases, and his land around him put away their idols, and they start worshiping God, and they begin to depend on God for their daily bread, for their daily life. But they might go into war because of that, right? So, despite their righteousness, bad things happen. Does that mean they're not blessed by God? And the answer is by no means. Of course, they're blessed by God. But in this world, because of the disorder introduced by sin, because sin tends towards death, there's a disorder there. There's a thing that goes against God's order, an anti-order there. Because of the culmination of because of the thing that the disorder or the anti-order introduced in there, sometimes good works or righteous works have bad results, and sometimes unjustly, and sometimes evil works unjustly have good results. And as Christians, we're supposed to see that, and we're supposed to now parse out the order in that, why it's this way according to God's order, by His revelation, the special revelation of God. So, I hope it all making sense because, like I said, I'm not trying, I'm trying not to ramble, but like I see, like right now, I'm listening to a lot of Norman Finkelstein's things, not because I'm a leftist. I'm actually, you could say I'm on the right, but I'm sort of like a traditionist. But but I'm learning a lot from the things, just from his the way he sees things, because actually, like he might say he's leftist, but from my point of view, he's more like a centrist leaning left. That doesn't. None of that matters. None of that matters. What matters is sometimes he tends to ramble because he's trying to portray accurately what's going on in his mind, so that the audience understands like what he's getting at from where he's coming from, and then like the process. And I think it's sort of like rubbing off on me where like I'm starting to ramble off too, because I'm trying not to, but it's like these details and these nuances are very important. That's the point. Whew, yeah, so we can't, in other words, like, we're in this age of like tweets and like short things, and because they're so compressed, it's not nuanced enough to get across. In other words, like you have thumbnails. People are living thumbnail lives. I think this is borrowing from Jordan Peterson's language. We're living thumbnail lives, but our lives are not meant to be lived in thumbnail format. Our lives are meant to be lived in 4K, 8K plus, 120, 200 frames, HDR plus, rendering. That's the way we were created. But because of the influence of sin, and especially because as human beings, we're not, especially modern human beings, we're not developing our character towards this betterment or towards a common good or towards, all these things that we're supposed to be working on. We're sort of just lazy, and we're sort of like just, become consumers of like garbage. For instance, like the AI thing, the AI is a classic example of what I'm talking about. In fact, I'm pretty sure like if the philosopher, not only the philosopher, but just like the classical people, like the people who actually thought through stuff. I'm not talking about smart people now. I'm talking about people who are just wise and are able to see the truth of like, just even if it's for a moment, they're able to have the war of fog and the war of sin just temporarily suspended or temporarily suppressed by God. And they have this moment of clarity where they see the world for what it is, with all its influence of sin, and then what it was supposed to be. They have like this moment of clarity, and they go, oh, see, this is why, so this is why we need to restrain our will. We need to restrain the evil that sort of like tries to come out. This is what there needs to be discipline, right? All these things. We sort of lost that in our modern society. So when we read things like this Balaam thing and we're talking about blessing, we already begin with like these very not nuanced thumbnail sketch of like what we think the stuff is talking about. But it's not the way it was meant to be read. It's meant to be read in high definition. 4K, 8K plus definition is what it was supposed. 16K plus definition. It was meant to be absorbed to its fullest degree, and not a simple, how do I apply this in my life? That's not the way it was supposed to be read. That's not the way it was supposed to be absorbed. It was supposed to be meant for like meditation, to think upon it. A low resolution thumbnail, no matter how much you try to see the details of it, can't give you the details because it wasn't meant for that. It was meant to be a low res thumbnail. It's what it was meant to be. Whereas this was not meant to be a thumbnail. If anything, what that thumbnail should do is it should get us some sort of an interest. It should let us know, okay, so here's the boundaries of like what we're supposed to be looking at here, and how do we develop this here? What's God developing here? How do we get to know God in this way more, or by what He's talking about? And one of the things that we know God is by understanding what blessing is, and it's the increase in God's righteousness. And even modern Christians don't have this concept of like a moral right as being absolute. But the thing is, like, the righteousness of God includes the moral right, the moral absolute right, like the properness right, and value too. There is actually a order of value. That's why we can say that's why in the New Testament, because there is a order to value and because there's an order to value, you can prioritize what value is higher, which is why God can say in Jesus Christ, his parable, or not parable, his example, the thing that he gives where he says like you can't have two masters. You will love one and hate the other. It's not and like if you understand with its nuance, and the more deeply you try to understand what deeper nuances, you understand you can't have phrases like you can love money, but you have to love God more. You can't have these kind of phrases, right? As long as you love God more, because that Bible passage that Jesus explains, or that he's given that parable or the story, that's not what he's talking about. He's saying you're going to hate the one and love the other, right? You hate it because it's preventing you from obeying this master. So you can't have these two masters because one is preventing you from obeying the other. There's a competition of authority here. And if you don't have the nuance to understand that, you have these dumb phrases that some people go, there was once, I had back when I was in high school, there was one Chundusani who was like, I love money. But he says, I love God more. But it's like, that's not what the Bible's talking about. You can't. The fact that you can say you love money or you love mammon, like that should tell you something about like the state of your faith and like whether you understand the Bible. And the question is like, why are you a Chondosani? How can you teach that to your congregation? Anyway, all this to say, yeah. So these nuances are very significant. They're very important. And when God is talking about blessing, he's talking about the increase in God's righteousness. And then what should follow is the good things that happen, or the wages of that righteous works is what should happen. The wages of the increase in righteousness. And at the end goal towards that is the goodness of God's will, or like his goodwill accord. Oh, hey. Oh, yeah. You can keep it on. It doesn't matter. You can keep it on. There's like pizza here for you.
This is Luca. Yeah, nice to meet
Luke?
you.
Luca.
Yes.
Okay. Should I just call you Luca or?
Yeah, Luca's fine.
Okay, Luca.
I brought donuts.
Oh, thank you. And there's pizza here too if you guys want.
Thank you.
We have like there's chairs over there if you guys want to sit. Are you okay? You haven't been in.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I've just been sick, and then with New Year's,
Right.
family stuff. Because my dad wanted me to go to his church.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. But,
I thought he went here.
No, I mean, he kind of goes to here occasionally, but he also goes to one in Roslyn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And are you just visiting today, or?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
basically.
Well, Bible study's gonna be over like in 10 minutes. Do you guys have any like questions you want to ask, or?
Are we do we have a packet though?
Yeah, we're here. We're talking about the last page right now, Balaam.
Yeah.
But you got a little bit glaze.
Wait, Lucas. So, are you a Christian or?
I'm actually
Thank you.
not. I grew up Catholic, but I'm actually.
Catholic is Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but I'm actually currently a-religious.
Okay.
So yeah.
Were you baptized?
Yes, I was.
Then you're not a-religious.
Okay.
At least according to the Catholic faith. Once you're
Yeah.
baptized, like
Okay.
it's inevitable you're gonna come back to the faith. It's
Okay.
inevitable.
Okay. Well, I mean, because there's what's.
I'm not Catholic, by the way. We're Reformed.
No, I get you. Yeah, I think Jack told me. But
Yeah.
it's just because I'm Croatian and most
Okay.
of my time in church was in Croatian, and I'm not very fluent, so I
Okay.
actually don't know a lot about the religion because
Oh, okay.
I would kind of just zone out during church,
Right.
So
No,
I
but there's
didn't
like
even
the
know
like masses you went to,
Yeah.
the communion, right?
that. Yeah,
So yeah, you're fluent, but you don't know you actually like really fluent because they put a lot of that stuff into practice. But like so you probably know a lot about it, but nobody probably just explained to you like what all this means, which is probably
yeah, exactly. Like I didn't even know about the baptism thing, and
Yeah.
even like Bible study was also Croatian,
Okay.
with like as kids and stuff. So after church, I would just sit out and then just zone out again.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, by the way, so this is recording. Should I end it or if you guys are you okay with the
I'm fine. With it.
okay. Because yeah, we still have like 15 minutes. We started late today because a lot of people that are normally here. So James I think he's sick. James, and then Joni doesn't have a ride, and then
Oh, has Joni reached out too?
no,
Oh, okay.
but I asked her mom
Yeah.
because she comes here, and she's like, yeah, sometimes she comes, but sometimes if there's no ride, she doesn't want to like. Yeah, so I was like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've occasionally reached out to her, but
Yeah.
she seems really busy. So.
Busy and trying to, especially for the new year. Everybody's trying to just get their life in order for the new year. Everybody.
Yeah, everyone's
Yeah.
busy.
Right. And then some people are sick. Like there's a new guy, Henry. He says he's like
Henry.
the new guy. I don't know his last
Oh,
name.
he's new, so he's not the Henry who comes to early service.
Yeah.
Okay. But he's been coming to Bible study.
Yes.
Oh,
I mean,
cool.
he wanted to, but he got sick. Is the thing. That's the thing. So he said he was going to, and then he got sick, and then he asked for prayers because he was getting really sick. So.
Is Hamonim okay? Or?
So she's also busy with some other church piano playing because it's New Year.
Hamonim is basically Korean for
Pastor's wife.
Okay.
yeah.
There's like a dedicated word for that.
That's cool.
Usually, he comes along too. You want some pizza?
No, I'm alright for now.
Alright.
Yeah.
Are you sure? This is really good pizza. You can
Yeah.
take it home. Like take it home
Yeah.
and like eat it, and then let me know if
Okay. Thank you.
Can we take it all?
take all of it. Yeah,
Okay.
all of it. Yes,
Oh, I had to ask.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
good
all.
pizza.
Yeah, it's really good
If-
pizza.
If you don't mind.
No, not at all. Because that's the whole point of having the pizza is like for people to come here and then take some home. So they'd be like, oh, they have good pizza there. Come back next week. Anyway, so
yeah, we're on the last page.
yeah, so what we've been talking about is this guy named Balaam. So we haven't. This is very loaded. So I'm trying to break it down into like little pieces that. So Balaam, back in the Old Testament, people heard rumors about God, but so in other words, like there's like degrees. So it's like people like Abraham. Not only did they know God, but they understood who God was and then worshiped God. Then there's people like Job who never met God. I mean, he met God eventually, but he only heard rumors about God. But he was like, well, this is the real God. And he worshiped that God through the practice that he heard the rumors for, which is like, the clean animal sacrifices for like the sins. And then eventually God meets Job and says, yeah, like you're my guy. This guy, my servant. So there's those kind of people. And then there's like people who heard about the rumor, like, you know, the work that God has done, like the miracles that God does and stuff like that. And yet they don't worship that God. They still they still cling to their own idols or their own deity, but they know that that stronger God exists somewhere out there. And then you have like the the more extreme than that, which is they've never heard about, you know, that God at all. So these guys are just living like the Canaanites, like they just, well, not all the Canaanites, but so they just live in their, you know, idol worshiping practices. And Balaam happens to fall somewhere in the middle between Job and the people that, you know about God but really don't worship him. So what ends up happening is the king of Moab commands Balaam, because he's a prophet of sorts, and he goes, I want you to curse Israel so that Israel will lose to me. So on his way, God sends an angel, and he stops the donkey that Balaam is riding on from going any forward, from going any more forward, like on a mountain. And there's like no passage to like the either side. And he starts like beating the donkey with like a stick, like, get moving. And then God opened the mouth of the donkey, and then and you know, this is the part where people are like, oh, that's not believable. How can God, you know, open the mouth of an owl? But so if we're taking the story and it's, you know, face value, it's, well, the donkey suddenly started talking, and it was like, Master, what have I ever done to you to deserve this? Have I ever, you know, misled you or like didn't obey you before? Why are you hitting me? And then Balaam's like, you stupid donkey, right? And that's when God opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel that was also that was preventing the donkey from moving. And now the angel goes to Balaam, you need to bless Israel. So I want you to say exactly what I tell you to say, and no cursing.
So what relationship did Balaam have with King Moab?
Yeah, so he's just the prophet, and King Moab just hired him to curse. Yeah,
Okay.
because in those days, like, and that's what I was trying to explain when you guys came in, is this notion of like blessing and cursing. We don't. So back in the Old Testament days, like they had what you might call like a tangible effect. I mean, they have a tangible effect now, but now it's different. Now it's different because it's post-resurrection Jesus Christ, which means a lot of it has been dissolved. A lot of the curse has been dissolved in Jesus Christ. But in the Old Testament, Jesus Christ hasn't come, like the Messiah hasn't come yet. So when somebody who's a prophet of God, or you could say like has these powers or has these like spiritual gifts, when they curse somebody, like, you know, the fruit of that actually like happens. And an example of that is Elisha. He's bald, so these kids come up and like make fun of his baldness, and Elisha's like, you know, I curse a bear to like eat you guys and like destroy you guys. A bear comes out of nowhere and like kills the children, right? So you're like, okay.
So the curse is diminished because everyone's a priest now because Jesus died?
The curse is, so the effects of the curse is somewhat lessened.
Curse of sin, or what kind of curse?
So so that's what I was explaining. So
Oh.
yeah, so our notion of our pagan notion. So Christians actually have like, this is something we need to get away from, is despite calling ourselves Christians, we usually have this folklore Christianity, or like folk Christianity notion of a lot of these things. So for instance, what do you call somebody who talks to spirits?
A medium.
Right. But then Christians turn around and go, prayer is talking with God. No, it's not. Otherwise, you're a medium, right? Prayer is the verbal expression, or like the heart's expression of your dependence on God. That's not what mediums do. Mediums don't depend on spirits. They talk with them. That's not what Christians do. When we pray, we're actually asking God in supplication, give us this day our daily bread. Like that's what we're actually asking for. We're actually manifesting or expressing our dependence on God. And that's what prayer is when we ask God, or we confess to God, we depend on you for this. That's
is
prayer.
not a conversation.
It's not.
Okay.
Because again, if you just go, if a person talks to a spirit, by definition, what is that?
Speaking medium.
Yeah, it's a medium. It's a spirit talker, which is not what Christianity is. You see? So we hold these like pagan, and we hold these pagan notions of what, not only do we hold these pagan notions, then we like we spread it because pastors would say like to other people, yeah, you talk with God. No, it's not talking with God. It's an expression of your dependence.
So that premise falls under folk Christianity.
Yeah, if you're talking with God, if you think prayer means you talk with God, you think of God as a folk spirit and not like the creator who created the entire world. Because if you understood that God created the entire world and therefore you're dependent on him even for your breath, right? Once you understand that, then you understand, oh, prayer is the expression of that. Then you say, thank you, God, for this. God, we need this. Daily bread, whatever it is you need. Right?
Yeah, because folk Christianity is, I think one of the Bible studies we were just briefly talking about folk Christianity. One of the things I thought was, one of the things of Christianity is praying in groups, in larger groups, means that the prayer is more effective, but that's folk Christianity. Right?
It depends.
Okay.
And that's because Jesus, so are they praying together in large group because Jesus Christ promised, if 2 and 3 of you gather in my name, I will be there. If that's the reason they're gathering, then that's not folk Christianity.
Okay.
But if they're gathering there because they think the spiritual power of the individuals sort of gather together and like make a Captain Planet version of like, Captain Planet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if some like the Voltron version, right, of some great prayer, that's folk Christianity. So it depends on why they gathered there in the first place. Is it because they believe in the promise that Jesus Christ said, if 2 or 3 or more of you gather, like I will be there among you? That's not folk Christianity.
So where does folk Christianity kind of come from?
It's whenever the Bible has the Bible is nuanced about its definition and the things that it's talking about. So a word or phrase might have several definitions, but they're like related definitions. And similarly, like this one concept might have separate words or phrases, but they all point to the same concept. Folk Christianity is, despite the Bible describing this, they create their own definition or own set of like ecology of definitions or an ecology of concept, and they work with this concept rather than the biblical concepts. So, for instance,
It's like pushing an agenda that's not found in the Bible.
Yeah, or like you use proof text outside the context of what those verses were meant for. So for the Catholic, for the Reformed, we would say like having a pope is a folk Christianity because there's no need for a vicar of Christ, as Christ is supposed to be the representation of like the whole human race or whatever. And then the Catholics would accuse us of heresy because they would say you have to have a vicar of Christ because it's the whole reason for having a priesthood in the first place, right? So they would consider our not having a pope folk Christianity because in the Christian historic traditions, you didn't have a time where you didn't have a pope. Whereas we would say, yeah, but the pope wasn't the pope that he's now. That's not the. I don't know if you guys know that. That's not the first pope. The first pope. Yeah. So they say Peter was the first pope. Technically, no. There was actually. Yes, I don't. I gotta brush on my history, but there was actually a literal first by the bishop saying this guy is going to represent the head, who is Jesus Christ, and we're going to call him the vicar of Christ. There's a moment when that happened in history, and it wasn't Peter. It wasn't Peter. I forgot what year. It was like pretty early on though, which is why like.
So before Peter, there was a vicar.
After Peter.
After. Okay.
Yeah, but the first guy that was chosen for that, he was saying he got that authority from Peter, which is why the whole Catholic tradition now says Peter was the first pope.
A vicar meaning.
Like a substitute or representation of the thing they're representing. So there's Christ, and then the Pope is the representational like face or the representational like so vicar comes from like that Latin word that means vice or like not vice, visage. You know visage, like your face? Yeah, so it's like a representation, it's like the representation of who Christ is supposed to be. Right? That's what vicar means. Is the embodiment of like the representation of Christ on earth because Christ is in heaven. But again, like, so the Reform goes, that's folklore because the fact that Christ is in heaven does not mean we need a vicar here. And we say that's biblical. Whereas the Catholics say, no, the fact that Christ is in heaven means you need a vicar here. And that's biblical. But then by biblical, they means like the the Catholics mean biblical and historic tradition, whereas we're saying that part of history was the introduction of like not idol worship. What is it called? Paganism. It was the introduction of paganism that sort of like formulated the first pope and all that stuff. So, I mean, it's of course much more nuanced and much more historically complex than that. But that's like that's what, in a nutshell, what like the folk Christianity means. It's just something like the Bible is very clear about what this is, but then instead of working with this ecosystem of biblical concepts, they make another, and then they work with this one.
And that's Catholicism.
We say that's Catholicism,
Okay.
and the Catholics say, no, it's you guys, the Protestants. Yeah, but so actually, yeah, like the only people that sort of like both agree, or it gets complicated because it's like there's also the Orthodox. And when you bring them in there, it's like because they don't have a pope. The Orthodox don't have a pope, but they see us as heretics too.
Orthodox Christians? Or?
Yeah, or like Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, they actually come from one branch of Orthodox. One, what do you call it? One umbrella of like the Orthodox Christianity, which basically what they did. So, and it has the history of its own as well. There used to be one pope, but then because of the difference in the language between East and West, and then the political galvanization of that, there ended up being two popes that these bishops voted for. And they're saying your pope is invalid because there's only supposed to be one pope, and we have the lineage of the apostleship or whatever it is, and the Orthodox, no, we do, because we're the ones that have like the bishops that came from the original apostles and all stuff. So it galvanized, and then they had two popes, and then here they don't call him the pope, they just call him the father, like the great father or whatever, and he's not the pope, or his function is not the same as the pope, because the pope is supposed to be like representation of Christ. That's not over here in the Orthodox, and both of them see us Protestants as heretics.
So did that come after the Holy Roman Empire?
Yeah, I think it was around like maybe 900 to one. Like I got to brush up my history. I got a C, by the way, so I apologize if it's not totally accurate. But yeah, it was pretty. It wasn't very early, but it was like relatively pretty early on, like maybe like 1000 AD, around like roughly.
Oh.
Yeah. So and then that's when they split, kind of roughly 1000. And then they decided to keep the idea of a vicar of Christ, and then the Orthodox. This and it matters to them because for them the Pope is the reason why you can have like or maybe I can explain it this way. The church decides what goes in the Bible, right? And that's actually the input for that. The Pope can add his input for that. But for the Reformed, for us, the Protestants, it's not the church that tells us what the Bible is. It's the Bible that tells us what the church is, right? And then they go, well, how do you know what is or is not in the Bible? According to what God put historically together. So we take all the Old Testament from the Jewish Old Testament text, bind that as like the Old Testament. Catholics add a little bit, I think 4 books on top of that, the Maccabees and stuff, yeah. And then Reformed like those don't belong in there because even the Jews didn't recognize those as being holy books. And the Catholics go, well, the church decides what goes in the books, right? So, and the Reform goes, no, the church doesn't decide that. The books decide what the church is. Anyway, so we have different Bibles as well. But from the Reform point of view, we go, this is historically a Jewish canon, the books that we have. But we ordered it differently. They based it on, you could say, order of like importance of the Jewish identity, whereas the Protestant Bible is based on historic. So it ends on the history and then it begins like the prophets. So it's like it historically ends in 2 Chronicles, and then you have like the prophets that sort of interpret that. And then the New Testament, which interpret these things. So it's sort of like historically written. So the Old Testament is kind of like mixed between like history and because of theology. But yeah, so we go, history tells us which books God wanted in the Bible. And we know that because over the thousands of years which these things were hammered out, the Bible that we ended up with was the 66 books. Whereas the Catholics say, no, the Bible we ended up with was 72 books. Yeah. And like I said, it's way more nuanced. It's way more. There's a lot more to it, but and we can get into that if you guys want.
I mean, can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
'Cause I'm curious. Like,
No,
what?
long question. We're staying till 10.
I mean, what about like, what is it about the like, I guess extra Catholic books that, like, what kind of discredits them to Protestants?
So in the Protestant book, like there's God usually directly speaks to the person. And there's only one book in the Old Testament that doesn't do that, which is Esther. But because it was part of the Jewish canon, the Reform just accepted it because it was already there. But as far as like the Catholics, the other books go, there's no like direct, you could say. I mean, okay, so let me be more nuanced than that. Things have to agree. So you can't have contradictions at least in the Reform point of view, because in the Catholic point of view, you can't have contradictions because then it's the Pope and the Magisterium that determines like how you're supposed to interpret that. In the Reformed, the verses cannot contradict. If they do contradict, it's only a seeming contradiction, and it's only because of our limitation, because we don't have the infinite mind of God. We're
Right.
working with the limited. So, and because of that, we have to then explain how it's a limited interpretation that causes what seems to be a contradiction there. And there are many, you can say, like contradiction between the character of God described in the Maccabees, Ezra, and then like the rest of the Bible. Like there's a sort of like conflict of God's character there, because the Reformed always goes the Old Testament Israel, or maybe I can put it this way: Old Testament Israel is a prototype, or sort of like a precursor to like what the church is supposed to be.
Right.
In the other books, so in the Protestant book, it ends with Malachi, and it ends with the priesthood being defiled, and they're like giving corrupt or like damaged goods up like as an offering to God, and it sort of like ends there. But then in the Catholic books, there's like I think 4 extra books, and it's like the history of it's a 400-year gap between that and Jesus Christ, and the books fill in the gap for like the wars that happened there. But the wars that happen there doesn't do anything to explain what happened to the priesthood, like at all. So the question is, if so, Malachi is 400 years before Jesus Christ. If this is what God's word ended on with this prophet here, what are all these other books doing here without talking about that priesthood that needs to be now like revived or renewed? Like, or what's the other word? Redeemed.
Right.
This priesthood has to be redeemed to like what it either not just what it used to be, but a better form of priesthood. But the 4 books in there doesn't talk about that at all, like at all. And then suddenly Jesus Christ is born, right? So you're like, what was the point of that then? Normally in like the progression of God's like in the Bible, when God progresses, when he leaves off of something, oftentimes like when he picks up, it like sort of goes back and says like this is where we're picking up,
Right.
And that's why the Jesus thing is important, because his death on the cross is the fulfillment of that corrupt priesthood now. So yeah, so I was actually explaining that earlier. The pagan sort of like idea of what a blessing is this idea that like good luck things happen. So the curse is like bad luck things happen. That's not the Christian or the biblical notion of what a blessing is. A blessing in the biblical notion is the order or the righteousness of God. There's an increase. So when God blesses Abraham and he says, I'll make you a blessing among the nations, and the nation that bless you, I will bless. The nation that curse you, I'll curse. And I'll make you a blessing among the nations, right? He says that. God's not saying, Abraham, I'm going to make your life good. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, in and through you, I'm going to increase the order of God's holiness. In other words, increase what should be proper or what should be right as image of God bearers. And in the case of the Abrahamic nations around him, it's to put away their idols and then start depending on God as their creator and not these like created images. So by blessing Abraham, what God is saying is, I'm going to put order in and through you and the tribe around you and the nations around you. I'm going to put order there. I'm going to put increase of righteousness there. And that righteousness is what the point of that blessing is, which is not, I'm going to give you a good life and the people around you can have a good life. That's not what. So in the Bible, there's a very classic, or there's a very famous verse, Romans chapter 6, verse 23. And it goes, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through his son, Jesus Christ, or through Jesus Christ. So sin is like works that go against God's order. So if God says this is right, this is the right thing to do, then God is saying this is the order that I have for the universe. And sin goes against that order. So if the thing that goes according to God's order is called righteous works, the thing that goes against God's order is called unrighteous works. So sin is all unrighteous works. And that's the definition that actually the Apostle John uses in 1 John something. 1 John like 5. 1 John, I forget what the verse is. It's 1 John. So if that's the case, the wages of sin is death. The wages of unrighteous works is death. So what is death? Well, in the beginning, God created all things, and then God created Adam, and then he breathed the breath of life into Adam. So God's goodwill toward God's image bears his life. That's his goal, right? That's his wildlife, so they can reflect God's glory. And that's actually tied to worship now. So if that's God's goodwill, death is to be cut off from that God's goodwill. And that's what curse is then, right? So then a blessing, what should happen is when God blesses somebody, righteousness increases in and around them. And then because the righteousness and the righteous works increase around them, the wages of those righteous works should increase as well. And that's the goodwill of God, or things that tend toward life. What we might call good things happening, generally speaking. And then if unrighteous works increases, that means they're not blessed by God because unrighteousness is increasing. And therefore, the wages of unrighteousness, which is death, the things that tend toward death increases, which is like what we would call bad luck stuff happening. The effect of sin breaks that, because sin itself, because it's an unrighteous work, and because unrighteous works goes against God's order, it introduces like anti-order or like disorder to the order of God's things. So you have people doing righteous things that are punished for doing what's right. Then you have like evil people being rewarded for good, and that's the effect of sin. You know, what God is saying is in the last day when Jesus Christ comes back, he's going to right all these wrongs here. So the person that was unjustly rewarded for a punishment or for evil for doing good, because it was an unjust punishment, God's going to correct that and actually like give him his due, you could say his due reward, his due wage. Same with the unrighteous guy, the guy who does evil but was unjustly rewarded with good. God's going to fix that, right? And he's going to be now justly rewarded with the unrighteous works that he did, the evil work that he did. That is the not folk Christianity. That's the proper understanding of like, blessing and stuff like that. So going back to the, because your question was about why some of the books in the Catholics have this, and then and why the Reformed have like, so we have these notions. So we have these notions of like what God's character should be, right? And this is actually like the huge debate between Catholics and Reformed. We're saying from the Reformed, because the Catholic was trying to be too universal, because they were they sort of like adopted the spirit of Rome, you could say, which is, yeah, you can practice your pagan religions too, as long as you keep the communion, as long as you go to church regularly, right? You can keep your practices. And then they switched out the idols they're worshiping for the images, like Mary and stuff. So I'm just talking historically now.
So the Pope saying, did the Pope say that God loves homosexuals?
Oh, the current Pope?
Yeah. Is that what he said? Or did he say something else?
If
that also falls under that, right?
Yeah. So the guy
Catholics appeal to everyone.
Yeah. So okay. if you don't believe the current pope is pope, you can't be a Catholic, because to be a Catholic, there's a catechism that teaches you what it means to be Catholic, and one of the tenets is the pope is always chosen by God. It's despite being chosen by the cardinals, it's actually chosen by God. He's actually chosen by God, and the things he speaks concerning I forgot what it's called, but it's this like religious instruction set. The things that he speaks about, those are infallible. Of course, Protestant we go, oh, no, humans can't be infallible, right? But Catholics believe that. So if you, he didn't say God loves homosexuals as if like God is accepting some sort of unrighteous. That's not what he technically said. Technically, he actually said, so if you're looking at it from the traditional Catholic point of view, in the words that he expressed when he says God loves homosexuals, he's talking about God loves the image bearer, because he's an image bearer of God. Because of the image of God, despite the corruption of it, the image is still there, and that's why God wants to redeem or rework that homosexual so that he or she gets baptized into the Catholic Church and begin that process of a restoration. Is the traditional way of looking at it. From my point of view, he's a Jesuit, which means that's not what he meant. So if you are traditional Catholics, he didn't say anything that went against tradition. But actually, I should probably end this because it's over an hour. All right, see you guys. But if you mean, if